The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
What exactly is the dependence of Georgia on Russia's economy, and what matters for Georgia more, Russian or the EU market? ISET's economist Yaroslava Babych talked to the Checkpoints. Yaroslava, thank you for being with us and taking our questions for BMG and the Checkpoints. Being Ukrainian, I know how tough this war is on you. What is the situation right now, and what could be some of the spillover effects, economic effects on Georgia and the rest of the world?
Right, Elena, this is very tough time for Ukraine, for the world, also for Georgia. Unfortunately, this war comes right as the world, as countries started emerging from COVID-19 pandemic. So unfortunately, the starting point, the macroeconomic indicators right now are worse than they were just 2 years ago before the pandemic started. So that adds to the risks that we see. So the main risks that are going to affect Georgia and the world have to do, of course, with prices. We already see energy prices have risen. I mean, they have risen in the past year due to the pandemic effects, but they're likely to rise more depending on how long the war is going to last. So then the crucial price that we are looking at here is wheat. Both Russia and Ukraine account for about a quarter of world's wheat supply, and this is a very
high
significant high dependency. These both countries are wheat exporters, and for Georgia in particular, that can have significance. So of course Ukraine is we know that the situation is tough here, but the people are holding on. And from what I heard last polls is that 76% say the country is on the right track. And more than 60% believe in the victory that will come, soon.
Slava Ukraini. That's the only comment that I have.
Thank you. Yes, and so given that the determination and given the world efforts to basically support Ukraine and help Ukrainian people win this war, I believe that these hopes will be realized. Now, what are the risks for Georgia?
This is the slide that shows Georgia's dependence on the Russian economy in 2021.
Let's start from exports. So we see that dependence on Russia overall is not very high. 14%. It's high, but it's not catastrophically high. Of course, we can see that EU share is a bit higher. Also, we can see that Azerbaijan is pretty high. So, but here, together with Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine exports, Georgian exports to Russia and Ukraine account for about 1/5 of the total. This is pretty significant. And more importantly, particular products are vulnerable. For example, as of last year, around 60% of Georgian wine, close to 60% of Georgian wine, goes to Russia. Around 40% of mineral waters. Around 44% of ferroalloys, which is also a significant export. As far as Ukraine, the dependence on Ukraine is mostly on fertilizers. Around 38% of fertilizers are exported to Ukraine. Of course, Georgia would have to find other markets and to lessen its dependency on the Russian market.
Yes, there comes my question. What should the private sector do in these circumstances? Because ISET, together with many other think tanks, has been warning the private sector that such dependency, let's say not high dependence, but growing dependency on Russian market would result something like this. Of course, we could not have envisaged neither pandemic nor almost a third world war in 21st century, the century which should have been a century of diplomacy rather than armed war. But yes, we still saw this growing dependency on Russian market. What should be Georgian private sector's stance? Should it join other businesses that say no to the Russian market, or what is the way out there?
Right now, as far as sanctions are concerned, the Georgian companies don't have to make a choice, really, because nobody is banning exports of wine or other products to Russia, even ferroalloys. What is banned, I think, are strategic exports, which Georgia doesn't trade with Russia. So there are no formal bans that Georgia would have to choose to join or not.
Yes, but there is this context of 400 global business players, for example, McDonald's, Microsoft, I mean, leaving Russian, I mean, it is, the picture, the overall picture is much bigger than what we are now
Right. So definitely, doing business, increasing business with Russia or somehow taking advantage of the situation would be a devastating reputational effect for Georgian businesses. But I don't see that Georgian businesses would be doing that, because the level of support inside Georgia is very high, right? But there will be other difficulties for them to trade. Russian market may not be formally closed, but because of the SWIFT related sanctions, the payments will be restricted, will be difficult to make. In case of Iran, when Iran was banned from SWIFT, 1/3 of its trade disappeared. So essentially it doesn't make the entire trade disappear, but it makes it more difficult.
So there will be no pragmatic business logic in working with Russian markets,
exactly, right? Plus the fact that ruble has sunk in value, and this makes Russia less likely to afford even products even in Georgia. So they have to conserve somehow their foreign exchange, and there might be some ruble transactions, but this is again a question. So we would see, I think we would see significant decline in exports to Russia, and reorientation to the
decline
European
in this number, right?
In this number, right. So definitely wine is one of the products that have been sanctioned by Russia in the past. So we have a foothold into the European
that's
market.
Why we have this market basically here. Because that was during Russia's embargo in 2006. Georgian wine explored Chinese market.
That's right. So China, EU, Ukraine were all markets where Georgian wine branched out, and that in the long run proved to be a positive thing for the business. So I think this time there will be also this tendency to reorient itself and become more competitive on these markets.
Yes. What about imports and FDI and remittances?
Let me talk a little bit. Remittances is an interesting actually figure. You see that we depend less on Russia now than, for example, on EU, and slightly more than USA. So what is going on here? If we compare with 2008, the share of remittances coming to Georgia from Russia was around 63%. So more than half, more than 60% we were dependent on people working in Russia and sending money here. Now this dependency is much less. It's half of what it was in 2015. So this dependency has been decreasing, and I think it will decline even more. And this is a good thing for Georgia.
Definitely.
Of course, in the short run, that means that some people will not be able to send money from the places where they work.
But it means much less for the overall economy.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right.
than
So
we could
overall,
have
the economy,
expected.
the economy of Georgia will not be as affected as it would have been in the past. So FDI, you can see foreign direct investment is not that big.
This is Achilles heel for Georgia's economy, unfortunately, for quite a number of years.
That's right. So in imports, this is an interesting figure, because you can see 10% here, which is quite low. And 4% in Ukraine, right? But if we go to the next slide, for example, we could see that the dependence
go to the
on certain.
sorry.
Yeah,
that's not right. This is this here. Yes, that's the slide.
So if we go to the next slide, we can see that the dependence on both Ukraine and Russia are high in particular products. So cereals like buckwheat and wheat and other grains, 87% comes from the Russian market. We can see that as far as edible oil, the oil, cooking oil, 62% comes from Russia. Energy products, we are dependent on electricity, gas, diesel, around 20%. It fluctuates based on the season, but still, for now, the dependence is not as high.
Yeah, this slide to me actually says that where Georgia managed to have diversification, and that's energy, is less problematic now.
That's
for
right.
Georgia,
the energy is very encouraging.
If these were high, yes.
If Europe could boast that number,
exactly.
they would be very, very happy.
All of us would be in a better position, actually.
That's right. But still, the energy prices have climbed up, and if they increase, let's say 20% more to $120 a barrel, $130 a barrel, we could see a rise in inflation in Georgia as well. So that, based on the past experience, it could add 2-3 percentage points to inflation. So there is still going to be a significant spillover effects, economic spillover effects, but the dependence is not as high now as it was. So as far as tourism is concerned.
Yes, and here, just sorry for interrupting, but here I don't see sugar, and I had to mention that. I had to mention that in these circumstances, and our viewers understand exactly what I mean under that. But if we add up the numbers here. Share of Russia and share of Ukraine, we definitely see that, for example, flour products. It's
very high. Yeah, so around 60%. Of course, we could find other markets, but that would mean buying at a higher price.
Yes, exactly. Of course, deficit of products in 21st century is
it started actually before the pandemic. Before the pandemic and during the pandemic, this tendency for food price increase became stronger, and we already saw a 30% increase in the food prices around the world. In Georgia, food prices increased by 17% just last year. So this is a significant share. And that means that people who are most vulnerable, who are poor, will suffer most. Because where do they get the calories? Most of the calories is from bread. And this is why there is another...
And probably SME sector also, because they have less leverage to diversify really in a short period of time.
Exactly. So SMEs, businesses that are vulnerable to these small businesses and businesses that have established ties, and would be difficult for them to reorient themselves.
And we should remember that these are the segments that have already been hit very strongly by the pandemic as well.
That's right. So the support for SMEs, the support for vulnerable groups should increase in Georgia. The Georgian government should keep an eye on the financial sector, which is the lifeblood of the economy. Right now, it showed to be quite resilient and strong in the face of the pandemic.
Do you think there is room for cutting some taxes, because that's what the business is asking for right now? That's VAT tax and that's the revenue tax.
That would mean the increase in government deficit. That would mean definitely it's not an easy solution, but it could be done. Along with other measures. So definitely borrowing is right now more difficult, but working with multinational partners, with international development organizations, could help Georgia overcome.
Sorry again for interrupting. We diverted from tourism. You mentioned tourism. What's going on here?
Yeah, so tourism is a very important part of Georgian economy, not just for the balance of payments overall, but because it is a source of cash for most for people who are otherwise are not employed, for informal employment. And we can see that Russia does have a significant share in tourism spending. So this comes from the GNTA survey of visitors. Although the Russian overall share in tourism visitors is not that high, it's around 12%. If we consider the figures, how much Russian tourists spend in Georgia, they spend less, significantly less than, let's say, European tourists. This particular share of Eastern Europe, and especially now when the world is emerging from the pandemic, when people are hungry for a bit of normalcy and travel and experience. So I think this is a good time for Georgia to welcome this high-paying tourists from Europe. Of course, that will be more difficult than hosting Russian tourism, because their expectations for quality in Europe are higher, and expectations from the infrastructure, from services are higher. So Russian market was quite a bit easier for Georgia, but still it's worth, just like with wine back in 2006, just it's
motivation for more diversification.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. So this picture actually tells me that it's a big deal. I mean, Russia's default, all the problems, of course, will have a spillover effect, but it's not as a big deal as some say.
I think there are significant risks, so it depends on how the war progresses and how soon it will end, what will be the scenarios. But I do think, my personal opinion is that COVID pandemic was a much bigger crisis for Georgia, and Georgia withstood, Georgian economy overcame this combination of fiscal policies, combination of financial sector policy support. So this crisis will, in my opinion, have less of an impact than the COVID.
Given the fact that there won't be another war in Georgia, and there
That's right. Yeah, there are significant geopolitical risks,
exactly.
And if the situation is frozen somehow or unresolved, then it's possible that foreign investors might think it's too risky to put their money in Georgia.
Yeah, that's the main risk that involves investor sentiments and investor expectations, definitely, which we thought would be like the first thing to work on for the fast recovery. after pandemic.
Yes. And I think the fact that Georgia is signaling European aspirations is a strong reputational factor, but also a signal for European investors, American investors, this is the country that,
yes.
that here
I come to my closing question, and thank you for your time again. And I think that's very logical to ask that in the context that you have just mentioned. What should be Georgia's stance in joining the international sanctions, and what would that mean for Georgia? Because some of the big businesses that you have mentioned, which are driving our exports, there we see Russian investments, right? So what does it mean for Georgia to be part of the international sanctions, and how that is related to the reputation that you just mentioned?
I think the businesses themselves, they are very sensitive to these reputational effects, and just like Europe is dependent on gas from Russia, Georgian businesses are also dependent on some critical exports. So the right message could be that we are going to have a plan for how to exit the Russian market if this war continues in this way. And
I know that you don't want to mention that, but I will say that, and not what we hear from the government, that this is the final decision and we won't be thinking about joining the sanctions.
I think that's not a good thing to say, because that means that it's a signal. It's basically a signal that taking sides, which Georgia should be very careful about. Georgia has European aspirations. You saw from all of these numbers here that we are more dependent on the EU than we are dependent on Russia. So which market would be worse to lose for us? The European market or the Russian market?
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.